Now, I don't know that I have ever met a sane person who's gone out of their way to go and find troubles and hardships. If you've met that person, we should pray for them. We should perhaps share the good news of Christ with them. That it's kind of strange. But yet it seems that troubles and hardships always find us, right? We're familiar with these things. We lose loved ones. We suffer setbacks in life, be it financial or in our careers, whatever it may be. We get poor diagnosis or diagnosis that we didn't want to hear at the doctor. Troubles and hardships come. Right here in our passage, we have a family who's facing a trial, their son on the verge of death. And as we look at a story like this and a miracle like this, it can be easy for us to start to assume things of the text. And some people may look at stories like this to say, look, Jesus doesn't want us to be sick. He doesn't want our families to go through trials. And I would push back on that and say that perhaps those very trials and hardships that we face in life are actually a grace from God, a mercy from God for us at times. Now, if you're familiar with any sort of Christian music, and you listen to Christian radio at all, you might be familiar with the song called Blessings, where the songwriter says that we pray for blessings, we pray for peace, comfort for family, protection while we sleep. We pray for healing, for prosperity. We pray for your mighty hand to ease our suffering, and all the while you hear each spoken need. Yet love is way too much to give us lesser things. And the song concludes with this. It says, what if my greatest disappointments or the aching of this life is the revealing of a greater thirst this world can't satisfy? What if trials of this life, the rain, the storms, the hardest nights, are your mercies in disguise? And I want us to keep that perspective in mind as we approach this text, because as we look at this, it's easy for us to maybe affirm as Christians, and lots of Christians may do this, that in life we would say, yes, trials can bring about good, hardships bring about good, but when we're feeling those trials, or in the midst of the pain, in the midst of the suffering, it can be hard to hold on to those truths. That's where songs like this may resonate with us. But as we look at this text, I want to be clear at the outset that what this passage is not about is just a resolution to all of our trials and sufferings. That if we walk out of this place today with the application being, if I could just believe, then Jesus will heal so-and-so. If I just had enough faith, then this solution would go away. That is not how we are going to apply this text, because I think what we're going to see as we work through this passage are two parallel stories going on at the same time. And we've said that John does that a lot, and Jesus is doing it in this very passage. On one level, on the very physical level, we have the story of the son who's on the verge of death. We have a desperate father who's come to Jesus, looking for help, looking for a solution. And Jesus performs a wonderful miracle, restoring this young man. The video we showed him as a little baby, and that hits home a little bit, right? For some of us with young kids. But if you've had children at all, you're picturing your kids in that situation. What wouldn't you do? And there's this desperation, this situation that's going on a very physical level. But the parallel story to it is the father coming to Jesus spiritually dead. Unlike his son who's just on the verge, his dad's there. But by the end of the story, as Jesus miraculously heals this young boy, restores his health to him, by the end of the story, the father sees life spiritually. Two parallel stories, one short passage, the physical and the spiritual. And I want us to hold these things in tension, because this is what Jesus is doing, and this is what John is conveying about the kingdom of God. We aren't told all these miraculous stories about Jesus just so that we might turn and say, well, if we would believe like the Father. If we would believe like he did, then Jesus would heal my ailments, my spouse's ailments, or my loved ones. He would take care of these solutions in my life. Now, don't get me wrong, this passage is all about belief. It's all about believing, but it's about believing in Jesus, not believing to manipulate Jesus. And this is the danger that we sometimes face. When we start making the applications more about our measure of faith, that if I believed enough, then Jesus would, then it's becoming all about us. It's about us being able to manipulate the power and influence of Christ for our own purposes. But what the real outcome, what the greater outcome of this passage is all about is the belief of the Father and his family there at the end, as you'll see it near the end of the passage in verse 53. That's the greatest outcome here. See, what belief in Christ is about is not just about the measure of our faith, but it's about the object of our faith. It's about Jesus being the one in whom we place our trust and understanding who he is, not just what he can do. So let's look at this passage and let's keep it in the context of John's gospel. So last week we talked about Jesus' interaction with the Samaritan woman, right? It shows up in this land with a bunch of people that the Jews don't like, the hundreds of years of history of just butting heads, not getting along. And it was on the basis of Jesus' word, as you'll see in verses 41 and 42 from last week, that they come and they say, and many more believed because of his word. It says that they said to the woman who originally went to them, it's no longer because of what you said that we believe, for we've heard it for ourselves. We've heard it straight from Jesus, and we now believe that he is indeed the Savior of the world. And then we transition right from there, and these first few verses, verse 43 through 45, might seem a little confusing in our text, or we might at least question, well, what's the big purpose in throwing those in there? That after 2 days, after Jesus and disciples stayed in Samaria with these people for 2 days, they departed for Galilee. Verse 44, for Jesus himself had testified that a prophet has no honor in his hometown. And a good way to phrase that may not even just be to say hometown, but his home country or with his home people. So we have this contrast between the Samaritans and the Jews. And right here in those following that in verse 45, so when he came to Galilee, the Galileans welcomed him. Why? Because they'd seen all that he'd done in Jerusalem at the feast, for they too had gone there. So here Jesus is back in Galilee. People, I want you to imagine the scenes. People excited for this Jesus because they've seen him perform miracles, signs. This is the miracle man. I could imagine people coming up and just wanting to see what's he going to do next, as if it's about the whiz-bang and the showmanship of Jesus. Like, this guy is just putting on a great show. And it's in this context that this man shows up. This man shows up and says, Jesus, my son's sick. Now, I want to give us a little bit of a picture. It says this man, he's an official, a royal official, so he likely had some influence, some financial resources. And here he's coming to Jesus desperately looking for help for his son. And Jesus rebukes him, if you will, in verse 48. I've got to get bigger text. It's hard to read here. Jesus says to him, unless you see signs and wonders, you'll not believe. Now, he says this in response to the man, but he says it not just to the man. When Jesus says, he's speaking of the Galileans, unless you guys see signs and wonders, you won't believe. What's the contrast there? The Samaritans. Did Jesus perform signs and wonders with the Samaritans? What was the merit on which the Samaritans believed in Jesus? His words. And Jesus now comes to his own people, and says, unless you see signs and wonders, you won't believe. See, this passage is all about belief. And we can be quick to say, look at the faith, look at the belief of this man. And I would pose that it's more likely this man first comes to Jesus like the Samaritans. Or, I'm sorry, not like the Samaritans, like the rest of the Galileans. Comes from, we don't know, maybe this man had been down in Jerusalem. He'd seen the things that Jesus had done. We don't know that for certain. But here he comes in desperation because of his son's condition. He's heard that this miracle man, who's come from Judea, verse 47. This guy performs miracles. I'm going to go talk to him. Maybe he can do something for my son. But given the difference and the emphasis that John places on this father from the beginning of the story to the end, I think this man comes to Jesus altogether lost, altogether looking for something. And at the end, he finds the thing that he's really been looking for the whole time. So, what's this story all about? It's about believing. Not on the basis just because of signs and wonders, not believing in signs and wonders, but believing in Jesus. And it might be strange for us to stop and think, how in the world could people see the signs that Jesus was doing and not believe in him as the Messiah? It wouldn't have been crazy. As a matter of fact, there's a long history for the Jews in doing that. If you went all the way back to Numbers chapter 14, God's performed all these signs and wonders in the presence of the nation of Israel. And he speaks with Moses, and the Lord says to Moses, how long will this people despise me? How long will they not believe in me? And get the ending of it. In spite of all the signs that I've done among them. See, just seeing signs and wonders does not guarantee belief. And sometimes we feel that way, don't we? If only I saw the things that the disciples saw. If only I saw the things that the Galileans and all these people when Jesus walked on the earth. If I saw those things, how could someone not believe that? Of course I believe. If only miracles like this were still happening now, then everyone would believe. Not the case. And I think what John is painting a picture of for us and for all of his readers is this. Of what it means to believe in Jesus. That, guys, primarily believing in Jesus takes him at his word. Believing in Jesus is about taking him at his word. That's the picture that he gave of the Samaritans. That's the picture that he's giving even here with this man. So he comes and says, heal my son. Jesus says, unless you see signs and wonders, you'll not believe. The official says to him, sir, come down before my child dies. What does Jesus say to him? Go. Your son will live. Go, your son will live. No immediate gratification, and I got to be honest with you guys, I'm an immediate gratification kind of guy. If I don't see instant results, I'm like, what's going on here? I like to see things take shape right now. If I want something, I want it now. That's just your pastor being honest with you. But this man, his son's on the verge of death, and I'm imagining Peter on the verge of death. I'm away from him, and I go and talk to this man who's got a reputation as a miracle man, and he says, go, your son will live. How do I know? What assurance do I have? And now this man's got a journey to go back home, likely somewhere in the ballpark of 20 miles, okay? Not crazy for us. You're like, oh, here to Big Rock, that's not that big of a deal. Sugar Grove, that's fine. He wasn't getting in a car going 60 miles an hour down Route 30. It wasn't even until the next day that he would receive affirmation that we would see later in our passage. So I want you to get into the mind of this father for a second. Go, your son will live. And right after that, it says that the man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and went on his way. Could you imagine the thoughts that father was having on his way? Wondering, doubting, questioning himself. I mean, for all this guy knew, his son was dead. Best case scenario, his son's healed. Likely scenario, he goes home and his son's exactly how he is. But this man said, go, your son will live. Is it true? I mean, this guy's healed people like right on sight, but 20 miles? He's not even with my son. He hasn't even seen my son. He doesn't know what my son looks like. How could he heal my son? But he said, go, your son will live. Imagine that as a parent on your way. But you've been there, haven't you? How many times has God told us something? And there's a wrestling that goes on in your heart. Trust or take it in my own hands. Believe Jesus. Believe the scriptures or control it myself. You've been there. You've wrestled with those things. And I think what we're seeing in this passage and what Jesus is teaching people and John's trying to convey to us is that, listen, guys, believing in Jesus, taking him at his word means that there's an expectation that we act on Jesus' words. Because let me ask this. If you say you believe something, but it does not produce fruit in your life, in other words, if your belief does not lead to action, do you really believe it? Do you really believe that it's true? Now, obviously, Jesus isn't saying to us today, hey, go, your son's going to live, right? We're not going to take that command of Jesus and apply it to us, but the principle stands that when Jesus says something, will we not believe him? Will we not take him at his word? Will we not act on what Jesus says? Again, it's easy, right, when it doesn't cost us something. And this is where the rubber meets the road, when belief impregnates action. And if it's not doing that, you've got to get honest with yourself in the depths of your heart. Do I really believe this? Do I really believe these things to be true? Because it's nice to be fond of Jesus' teachings, even the ideologies of Christianity, until it starts to demand something of you. Until it starts to ask you to follow, to die to yourself, to live to Christ, to be slaves unto righteousness. Until these things start coming in and you realize you're not the master of your life anymore, and then suddenly that's where the rubber meets the road a little bit, and it's like, wait a second, I like these teachings, but when they ask me to do something that's contrary to my nature, that's where it gets tough. Because by nature, we're prone to wander, aren't we? We're prone to doubt God. We're prone to take things into our own hands. We're prone to ultimately live lives that lead to death. But it's by the grace and mercy of God and trusting and following him that the opposite may be true. And so we pose this out there, to talk about trusting Jesus, acting on his words. And some of us stop and are really struggling with this. If we really get honest, it's hard to trust. It's difficult to trust because trust is earned, isn't it? We know that to be true in our earthly relationships. We don't just meet someone for the first time and trust them with our life savings. We don't meet someone the first time and trust them with our babies. Trust is earned. And some of us are coming into a relationship or this conversation with the experience of a child whose father, the person they should trust, asks them to go stand up on a porch and say, buddy, jump, I'm going to catch you. I'm supposed to trust this man, my dad. So he jumps, and as he jumps, dad steps out of the way and lets his kid fall to the ground. We can't imagine that happening, but isn't that the story that some of you felt in your life? And the moral of the lesson, the dad looks at the little boy and says, son, don't ever trust anybody. And that's the lessons that some of us have learned. Don't trust people. Don't trust anybody. They're always going to let you down. And we bring that into our relationship with Christ at times. How could I trust him? I can't even physically, I can't give him a hug. I can't shake his hand. How can I trust? Some of us have the experience, and it's easier to trust. Because maybe like a father teaching his kid how to ride a bike is patient and gracious and kind and comes alongside, helps hold the bike and the kid on to balance, and always trying to help him figure it out, and seeing this kid kind of get it, let's go, and watches him until he runs into the tree, right? Because the reality is we know that we stumble and fall, but the father, being gracious and compassionate, goes and picks the kid up, brushes the dirt off. Buddy, it's all right, let's try again. And the kindness of the father earns the trust of the child over and over. Jesus is trustworthy. But sometimes we look at the trials of life and we say, he must not be worthy of my trust, because how could he let this happen? But on the contrary, I would say this, that in the midst of those trials, how faithful is he? That the faithfulness of God is not just about resolving the pain and suffering in life, but the faithfulness of God is that he's with us in the midst. Think back to your struggles. The people that you appreciated having around you. The people who were there with you. That you could call up just to talk to some, get something off your chest. The people who brought meals, who helped your family, give rides, whatever, I don't know. The people who were there to help you carry through those times. You appreciate that. Man, Christ, so much greater. And in the midst of our troubles, in the midst of our trials, he's there to carry us through. Trust is built over time and experience. You need both. You don't trust someone right away with everything when you've just first met them, but over time, and over your engagement with that person, your experience with them, that's when the opportunity for trust to grow comes, because either over time and experience, you're going to learn, I can't trust this person, or you're going to learn that I can trust them. And I would argue, brothers and sisters, that even if you've not been walking with Christ for a long time, we have been given the blessing of time and even the perspective of experience right here in God's Word. Our lives are short. 80 years and we die? 90 years and we die? But we have the testimony of God's faithfulness back to the creation of time. It says He's trustworthy in all of this. We see Him engage with people as people go through the trials and confusions and reality of life, and we see the faithfulness of God in those situations. We have each other, don't we? The testimony of God's faithfulness in our lives, the fellowship with one another that we can share of God's faithfulness. We can encourage one another with our stories of how God's been true to us. In our hurts, in the triumphs and joys of life, these things help give us perspective to show, yes, God is worthy of my trust. And this man in this passage, given verse 47, it seems that he's come to Jesus with some knowledge of who He is. Now, whether he had that firsthand experience with Jesus in Jerusalem, or he's going on the stories and testimonies of other people who'd been there and seen that, he comes to Jesus with some expectation. He heard that Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee. He went and asked Him to come down and heal his son. He came having some level of trust that Jesus is able, that Jesus is capable, but he had missed altogether who Jesus is. I would argue, brothers and sisters, that taking Jesus at His word involves acting on those words. Act on Him. When He says something, take Him at His word. When He says He's the Son of God, the Messiah, that He holds all things in His hand, live like that's true. When He talks of the kingdom of God, live like we live in that kingdom. But secondly, as we look through this, I think taking Jesus at His word also means leaving the outcomes to Him. Leaving the outcomes to Christ. Because how often do we like to try to take control for ourselves? And I think all of us do this in some way. Because all of us, to some extent, like control in our lives. Now, some of us like a lot of control in our life. We like to control down to the minutes and know every plan in detail. We like to go through everything and have everything dialed in just right. We like control. But sometimes trusting in Jesus is saying, I'm willing to let go and release some of this control and leave the outcomes to Him. Now, I'm a planner. I'm the kind of guy who likes to have all ducks in a row before I jump into something. And my wife will attest to that. That when we're trying to make plans, I'm like, well, what about? Well, sometimes you just got to get moving and trust the Lord with things, right? This man could have stood there. He could have stood there and said, hey, I'm not leaving until you come with me. But he went on his way. I think the picture is saying, okay, Jesus said it's done. I'm going to live like it's done. What a lesson that we can learn. To leave those outcomes to Christ. To trust Him with these things. See, the Father, He was helpless. He was desperate. Who knows the solutions He's tried to look into. He had influence, maybe tried to get all the best medical advice and help that he could have gotten. He threw all of his resources at this situation. Who knows? Those things, whatever they were, whatever he did, led to nothing. Here he is, desperate at Christ, leaving the outcomes to Him. I can only imagine that if I were him, I would have stopped and asked the follow-up question, how can I know that what you say is true? And Jesus probably would respond and say, don't you want to trust me at my word? Take me at my word. I've got this. And had the man asked that question, what difference would have been there between him and the rest of the host of Galileans who believed in Jesus based on signs and wonders, not taking him at his word, not believing in him as the basis of his word? Sometimes, and I'm going to say this as a control guy, there is freedom and there is peace in leaving the solutions to Christ. That when he says it, live like it's true. Isn't that what faith is? Hebrews 11, right? It's impossible to please God without faith. It goes into the whole hall of faith. By faith, so-and-so. By faith, so-and-so. And all these people by faith. And you know what the conviction was? That by faith they lived as if what God had said was true. That by faith they believed that they had already inherited the promised land. That by faith they believed they had already inherited eternity. That can we not live by faith in the certainty that what God has said and live like it's actually true? That it's done, sealed, because he said it? What other confirmation do we need? If God's true and he cannot lie, then we have everything that we need to trust him. We have everything we need to follow him. But our struggles come in because we recognize that not everything always ends with flowers and smiles, right? I mean, this couldn't have hit home any harder than in our small group this week. This is great. This is a great story, but some of us sit here and we read this story and we're like, that's not how it ended for me. Why didn't Jesus heal my son? And that's where we start to struggle with these things. Because that's where the rubber really meets the road. And we start to conclude that unless the miraculous happens, then God must not be faithful. That if God doesn't resolve our conflicts, our trials, then he must not be trustworthy. But in the depths of your heart, do you really believe that to be true? Remember, there's a parallel story here. We've got the illness of the Son, but we have the spiritual death of the Father. And I would argue that perhaps at times in our trials, God is using those things to draw us closer to himself, to reveal himself to us in greater ways. And is that not enough to be thankful? That we have an opportunity to become more like Christ? An opportunity to know him better, to walk more closely with him? Now that's kingdom perspective. Because the world, that doesn't make sense to the world. That doesn't make sense to our flesh by any means. Bill in small group this week, he talked about these light and momentary afflictions. That's how Paul defined all the things he'd gone through. These light and momentary afflictions. But they pale in comparison to the glory of knowing Christ. Can we say that from the depths of our heart with authenticity, with truthfulness, that the trials of life, they pale in comparison to what it is to know Christ, that I can be grateful for those trials if it means I might know him more, learn something with him, walk more closely with him. And isn't that what happens in this passage? And that's where I would pose this situation for us. That when we sit and long for the miraculous and say, without it, God must not be faithful, I would argue this and ask you this question. If in the midst of your trial, in the midst of your suffering, did it cause you to walk closer with Christ? If you can answer yes, then what a blessing. Kingdom perspective. Because what does Jesus say eternal life is? It's to know him and to know God whom he sent. That's life. Life is to know Christ. So if at times God uses the trials of our life to get a hold of us and to draw us closer to himself, thank you, Lord. Thank you for refining me. Romans talks about rejoicing in our sufferings because we know they produce character, and our character produces hope. And hope does not put us to shame. Kingdom perspective. Guys, who knows? This father, would he have ever come to Christ if it weren't for the trial in his life? Would he have ever come to Christ if his kid wasn't on the verge of death? I don't know. I don't know. We can't conclude those things. But what we can say is that it's because his kid was on the verge of death that he came to Jesus, and he had an opportunity to see Jesus for who he was. And the miracle was the confirmation that Jesus is who he said he is. And wouldn't it be great at times like this man to be on your way home and to find that confirmation and as simply as looking at your watch? He's on his way home. The next day, by the way, verse 52, and his servants had come to him and said that your son is recovering. And he asks them the hour when he began to get better. And they said to him, well, yesterday at the 7th hour the fever left him. The father knew that that was the hour when Jesus had said to him, your son will live. And he himself believed, and all of his household. Man, it would be great, wouldn't it? To be able to just as simple as looking at your watch. But isn't it? Open a book, read the faithfulness and testimony of this Savior. Not only do we have the opportunities to walk with him ourselves, but we have the opportunities to look at this, to know this. What a blessing it is that easy, brothers and sisters. And here, as we kind of begin to wrap this up, we look at this man in contrast, not just with the Galileans around him, but in unison with the Samaritans taking Jesus' word. And let me give you some perspective here. Because here he is learning by the end of this to place Jesus at the center. And that's what the Samaritans did. They began to orchestrate their lives around Christ. They took him at his word. The difference is in the Jews, they kind of kept themselves at the center because it was about the signs and wonders. And we can be so tempted, and I've known people who profess Christ who are more interested in the miraculous, in the spectacular, than they are actually in the person of Christ. And we can run that risk. But it's learning to put Christ at the center of our lives. Guys, before, did you know they used to believe that the universe revolved around us, the earth? We actually believed that the sun revolved around us. But as we've learned new things, as science has expanded, they learned that, well, no, that's not true. We actually revolve around the sun, and as a matter of fact, we are certainly not the center of the universe. But learning to take us out of the center and put Christ there, that everything about us revolves around not the Son, but the Son, the Son of God, that changes things. That reorients your life in an all-new way. To take him at his word, to believe in who he is. And that's just what this man does. Jesus healing his son wasn't just a means to an end, but he learned in that interaction what it meant to believe in Jesus. And believing in Jesus, trust in who he is. Trust in who he is. See, learning the hour that his son was better was the aha moment for the father. This miracle man, all the hype is legit. There really is something about him. And it says that he and his whole household believed. Now, this makes me think of one of my favorite movies as a kid growing up, and I'm going to step on lots of toes right now, okay? Because it's not Thanksgiving yet, and it's a Christmas movie, so sorry. One of my favorite movies growing up was The Santa Claus. Okay, and if you know the story of Santa Claus, if you don't, spoiler alerts, but I don't feel bad because the movie came out in 1994. So I think it's safe to say that if you haven't seen it, it's on you. Okay, so Santa Claus, here's what happens. Scott Calvin's an ordinary dude. Santa falls off his roof on one fateful Christmas, and he assumes the identity and role of Santa. Now, as a kid, ecstatic about this. This is great. Santa's my dad, right? But his ex-wife and her husband are like, this guy's losing it. He's becoming insane. The whole movie, you kind of have this struggle between the son and, this difference between him and his mom and her new husband, because he's believing that dad's Santa and they're not. There's no way. That doesn't make sense. Well, at the end of the movie, this is Scott Calvin as Santa gives to Neil, this is the ex-wife's new husband, gives to him a weenie whistle. Okay, I don't know if you remember this. And there he is in the movie, and he opens this little charm that has the weenie whistle inside. Blows him. Santa? He had the aha moment. He's like, you must be who you say you are. That was his aha moment. And now, listen carefully, because I need to make sure you get this. I am not comparing Jesus and Santa. What I'm comparing is the Father and Neil. The aha moment. When it clicked. And for the Father, it was seeing his Son be healed. For you, who knows what it was? There was a time in your life, if you're walking with Christ, you had an aha moment. Some of you may not be able to look back and say, this is the hour, the date, and the place that I became a Christian. But even I, growing up in a Christian household, can look back at a time where I realized that, man, walking with Christ is more than just going to Sunday school class. It's more than going to Bible class, and it's more than just going to church. It's believing in who Jesus is and walking with him. Believing and trusting in who he is. Jesus is not just some genie in a bottle. Jesus is not just some traveling miracle man. Jesus is not just some great moral teacher that if we follow him, we'll just be better people. Jesus is the Son of God, the promised Messiah who has come to deal with sin on the cross. And by rising from the dead, defeating the power of sin once and for all. Your sins put in the grave. Rising in victory with Christ. No longer a slave to sin, but now a slave to righteousness, because in that Christ gave you his righteousness. So we are slaves to him. The Apostle Paul, how often did he say, bondservant of Christ, a slave to Christ, a servant of Christ. We are bound to him in this. Realizing who he is, walking with him, following with him, reorients your life. You cannot accept Christ and welcome Christ and truly be a Christian and him not be the Lord of your life. The Galileans tried that and Jesus rebuked them. We want the show. We want the pleasures of it. We want all the happiness of it. And unless you see signs and wonders, you won't believe. Guys, this story is here to show us what believing in Jesus is all about. It's possible for people to try to accept him, but have they really accepted him if they don't believe and trust in who he is? He's not just a genie in a bottle to grant your wishes and solve your problems. He is God in the flesh. The God of the universe, the creator of all things. As John said, nothing came to be without him. That's who Jesus is. To trust him and to follow him, I can't imagine. Sometimes I stop and think, how great would it have been to just sit there and ask the questions. Well, what about? And then I think to myself, I still can. We can still wrestle with things. We can still learn things. We can still follow him even today. I don't want us to walk away from this and conclude that Jesus is against believing in view of signs and wonders, he's going to go on and perform more signs. He's going to do more miracles. John's going to write about more. John records these things so that we might believe. What Jesus is getting at is that we don't worship the signs and wonders, but we worship the one who does them. That we believe in Jesus, not just about him, but really in him. See, as humans, I recognize that we live in a physical world. We live physical lives where we can be drawn to the miraculous, where we want to see and experience the healing of this young boy in our life. But that was the side mission. The parallel stories. He was healed, but at the end, the father who was dead came to life. And how many of us have experienced that? What do we have? We can be so thankful that we've experienced that very thing. And so we'll go through trials. We'll go through hardships. I encourage you to take Jesus at his word, to continue to trust him, to continue to look to him. He's faithful. He's trustworthy. Because it's in those times that we might have an opportunity to walk closely with him. It's in those times that he might be using us to give other people a glimpse into his faithfulness. Our blessing, or our trials can be blessings. What if your greatest disappointments? What if the aching of your life is the revealing of a greater thirst that the world can't satisfy, but Christ can? What if the trials of this life, the rain, the storms, the hardest nights, are God's mercies in disguise?